Soy El Telsiega, and welcome to another installment of Listen In with Sara and Nikki. My name is Nikki Yi. I am a colonizer of Chinese and Mennonite descent, and I am joining from the traditional, unceded, and contemporary territories of the Kwikwetlem peoples. And I will turn it over to you, Sara, to introduce yourself.
And I am Sarah Florence Davidson, and my Haida name is Anjak Gusandlance, which means killer whale, woman of the dawn. And I'm joining you today from the unceded territories of the Katzie, the Kwantlen, and the Semiahmoo First Nations.
And today I had to twist Sarah's arm to talk about Sk'ad'a Stories as scholarship because I just find it so interesting the way that you have taken these stories and what you have done with them. And because you are you and you're so brilliant, I thought this would be a really great opportunity to share some of that brilliance with other people. So I just wanted for us to have a bit of a conversation around that today and so that we can kind of surface some of these ideas and share them out with a broader scholarly and also just everybody community. So maybe we just want to start. Can you just give us an overview for people who don't know, who haven't seen me holding up Jigging for Halibut with Tsinii every single time? Um, what are the Sk'ad'a stories?
Yeah, so it's a little bit tricky to talk about them without doing a brief intro on the Skada principles. So I think we've talked about them before, but just very briefly, if this is the first time you're tuning in to our conversation, the Skada principles are a group of principles, used to be 9, now 10, connected to Indigenous pedagogies and representative of pedagogical practices connected to Haida Gwaii. They're based on stories that my father, Robert Davidson, told me about his learning experiences as a child. And I worked with them, with his stories to sort of understand his learning and came up with these principles. And they're called the Sk'ad'a principles. Sk'ad'a is the Haida word for learn. And kind of differentiated from Haida principles. They haven't been sort of approved by the Haida Nation, but definitely rooted to my father's experiences growing up on Haida Gwaii. So we would think about them as a localized set of principles, pedagogical principles, Indigenous pedagogical principles. Um, and so we published those and shared those kind of most formally in Potlatch's Pedagogy. And a couple years later, I was really interested in thinking about how do we support educators to have land-based experiences and experiences learning culture alongside, no, maybe through picture books. And so my father and I decided to collaborate on a series of picture books. And the first one is Jigging for Halibut with Tsinii. And that is a story of my father learning from his grandfather how to jig for halibut. It's based on his experiences as a boy of about 12. And in that story, he's a grandson. And in the second book, learning to carve Argillite. He's learning to carve from his father and his grandfather. So in that one, he's a son. And in the third book, Returning to the Yakoun River, this is a story about my brother, me, and my cousin learning to fish at the Yakoun River. And in that story, my father's a father. And in the last story, Dancing with Our Ancestors, my father is a grandfather, and that is the story of my brother and I dancing at a potlatch in Heidelberg. And the four stories were stories that had been shared to write Potlatch's Pedagogy and then to come to understand the Sk'ad'a principles. And the intention in sharing the stories was, as I mentioned, to provide an opportunity for folks to kind of get a firsthand experience with these land-based pedagogies and cultural pedagogies, for students to Indigenous students to see themselves in the stories that were being shared. And they were based on conversations, interviews with my father, and my own lived experiences.
Yeah, thank you. I just really want to emphasize or maybe highlight something that you said. And that is, I guess, where I've seen a lot of value in these stories because sometimes people are like, oh, it's a picture book, it's a children's book, or, whatever. But really, like when I was reading Potlatch's Pedagogy, and then I'm like, oh, yeah, I was engaging with the Sk'ad'a principles. I'm like, yeah, yeah, I know what that means. But then when I read the books, it really helped me.
Pedagogy.
Yes, yes. It really helped me understand, like in lived experience, what it actually looks like. Like with my brain, I can understand, what you're talking about. But then to read it in the book, it just brought it into that sort of lived experience that really kind of added that layer of complexity and understanding that is hard to gain just through sort of that academic scholarly reading. And so it's kind of ironic, like that, through the non-scholarly reading, but maybe it speaks to sort of that holistic engagement that we've talked about before. But I just felt like I had a deeper understanding of the stories. And so that's kind of how I took it up. But I'm wondering, you have kind of, read the stories to lots of different audiences, and I wonder how other people are taking up the stories.
Yeah, and I just want to maybe go back to your point about the images. So the images were created by artist Janine Gibbons, and it was really important to us to collaborate with an artist who had lived experiences of the land of Haida Gwaii, and she lives up in Alaska, but very similar, and just sort of understanding the colors and understanding for jigging for halibut with Tsinii, she actually went out on a boat and reenacted the experience to really capture what it was like to be on the boat. And so, um, really grateful that she was able to collaborate with us to provide that experience. And I think that's been something that has resonated for a lot of the readers, is just sort of that opportunity to just kind of be there with my dad and his Tsinii on the boat. And so in terms of taking them up, I've used them in my classes. Well, maybe I should back up a little bit. I have a background with secondary teaching, and so I used to be a high school teacher, and so I loved bringing picture books into my classroom. And so these books were written as 1,000-word narrative essays, and so really trying to support secondary educators to bring them into their classes as well. Like I kind of see them as ideally from kind of grade 3, 4 up to I work with adults, and so use them with adults as well. But I think for different purposes, and working with the when I'm teaching with adults, it's been really helpful to help folks who want to be teachers or who are practicing teachers to understand about Indigenous pedagogies, and in a maybe a little more in-depth, more meaningful way. With the younger readers and listeners, when I've shared the books with younger folks, especially children on the Haida Gwaii, there have been these connections. Like, one time I was reading one of the stories to the students, and literally they could look out their window and see some of the images that Janine had created. And so I hope for them that they're having that sense of connecting with a story and seeing themselves in the stories. And the other part of them is that they aren't they're just sort of a day in the life. So even though there is that research process that's gone into the day, so the first two are written from my father's perspective. So it involved quite a bit of conversations with my father to ensure the accuracy of the information being shared. They're also just a day in his life, and wanting to encourage people who are reading them to think about their own lives and think about the stories that are in their lives. And it's, just in terms of thinking about a day in your life and describing that day, and that is a story that is worth sharing, worth hearing, so there's that part of it. There's so many so many dimensions to what it is that I was thinking about as I worked with them as an educator. And then in collaborating with my father, it provided him these opportunities to go back to those moments. And that was really meaningful for me as a daughter, to be able to provide him this opportunity to go back on the boat with his Tsinii for another day, thinking about my nieces and nephews, that they're able to kind of get to know these people, their ancestors. Each book has a real person in them, and so ensuring that they have that the ability to have relationships with those people, even though they're not with us anymore.
Mhm. I love like, yeah, all of the different dimensions and thinking about how the stories not only describe relationships, but also emerged from that relationship with your father. So when we're thinking about Sk'ad'a principles and the importance of relationship and learning, like it's really multidimensional in terms of what we see in the book. So it's just such a beautiful enactment or embodiment of, what those principles are. So yeah, just really appreciate the brilliance that kind of went into them. And it kind of brings me to sort of the next idea in terms of accessibility, I guess, because, you kind of talked about the different age ranges and how, you know, um, even young children can kind of access the stories. And so, I think about different scholars and the scholarly work that we're doing. And like, what other scholar has children who can access their scholarship? Like, no one. Maybe someone can like correct us in the comments or correct me in the comments. But like that to me is just such a true innovation. And I'm just wondering about the role of children in academic conversations, and if you have what are the impacts of sort of inviting children into this understanding around pedagogy, around kind of self-reflection and sort of that day in the life story that you kind of talked about. What are the implications of that, either for kids or for scholarship?
I think it was something that I didn't intentionally set out to do. I didn't intentionally I really the beginning of these stories was trying to capture those learning experiences that my father shared with me, and so it was never about, oh, let me think about a story that demonstrates all these Sk'ad'a principles so people can learn them. It was really about, can I capture that story that my father shared with me in the hopes that other folks might get some of the learning that I gained in hearing those stories. And so that to me was a pivotal moment. So if I think about
Mm.
Kwamkwampiam's Indigenous story work principles, this idea of making meaning from the stories. And so often in scholarship, we're breaking things up into these little chunks to try and present a particular perspective that is filtered through our own thinking and our own lens and our own perspective. And so the intention with this was to really try and capture this story so that folks could engage with the story directly. And for me, when we're thinking about decolonizing um, uh, knowledge mobilization, so if we're thinking about decolonizing the ways that we're sharing the knowledge that we're learning and what we're learning as scholars, it was really interesting for me to think about, like, wait a second, what happens if I just share the story and invite people to engage directly with those stories? Making it available to children was a really unique challenge
Mm.
um, to sort of think about, how do I make this, what I'm learning, relevant to this younger audience? Because I feel like we have an obligation. We're being paid, with public funds. We have an obligation to share what we're learning with as broad an audience as possible. And why not young people? Why not children? They're going to be here long after I am.
Mhm.
Um, and so it was an interesting opportunity to really think about, how am I sharing the knowledge that I don't like to say gaining, but what I'm learning in these conversations with a broader audience. And if I think about a picture book that's available free of charge through a library, that to me is, it's not behind a paywall. I'm thinking about the language that I'm using to make sure it is accessible to a wide audience. And if it's accessible to children, I feel for the most part it should be accessible to a pretty wide range of folks.
Mhm.
Images, working with images means that it's also accessible to folks who may not engage with text in the same way. But it's been a good challenge for me to think about how am I sharing what I'm learning with as many people as possible, and so that seemed to be a way to do that. And as I thought about the ways that I have shared information in the past, um, it was exciting and also maybe a little bit scary to be able to say, here's this story that was shared with me. I'm interested to learn more about how you understand this story, and the sense that you make of it. And it likely will be slightly different because we have different lived experiences. Um, but it it was really exciting to start thinking about how I might engage with this just differently than how we're trained to do in our graduate
Mhm.
studies, and
Yeah.
how it's reinforced in institutional settings.
Yeah. Because usually I might take a story and publish it as part of my article, but it's not like a grade three, child is picking that
Yeah.
article up and then reading it, right? And so there's just no sort of avenue for sort of sharing it in sort of this broad way. We didn't write down this question, but I'm just so curious to ask. Has there been any sort of meaning making that you've been surprised with? Like someone's come up and said, "Oh, I read it like this," and you're like, "Wow, that's a really different way of seeing it. I never thought of that before."
I don't I mean, it's been a while. So the books have been out for a while. And when I was on some social media platforms where I was able to engage directly with teachers, I really loved that because they had questions from the children that they were sharing the books with. And I remember a conversation like about the sound of crunching gravel. Like um the and I think I'll maybe share this really beautiful experience I had when I was sharing the story with, and so that doesn't necessarily have to do with meaning making, but just the ways that the books have, the way that readers or listeners have connected with the stories that were unexpected to me.
Mm,
And um, when I was reading to a class that was on Haida Gwaii, one of the things I was reading Returning to the Yakoun River, and one of the things that one of the students asked about was in that book it describes that my father sang Haida songs to my brother and me, and my one of the students raised their hand and said, what song did your dad sing to your brother and you? And I'm like, wait, like where did that question come from? Because it's never about that. And I said the song, and the student was like, oh, I don't know that song. And I'm like, you're a Haida student. I think you know the song, but I said maybe you don't know because I'm using the English name for the song, and I thought maybe. So I started singing the song to for the student to know which song. Oh, they knew which one it was, and we ended up in this moment where they were asking me to sing songs, and I would start singing the songs to them, and they ended up dancing. Like they ended up
mhm,
just getting up and dancing, and so that was unexpected to me. It was unexpected to me that I could be that far from my father's home community,
mm,
and have that moment of sharing dance culture through this Zoom platform. um, and I and that was really exciting to me. Like that to me is one of the top points of my career, was this moment of having shared a story. The students could look outside and see the land that was being described and was illustrated in that story, and then to sing them songs and
mm.
have them dance. I i i felt like, what else would you possibly want from putting sharing knowledge, and so I just was so immensely grateful for all of the different pieces that had come together for that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to think about them and having their sort of home knowledge validated by this big time author who has these published
I did
books.
not. I did not
And
authorize this description.
but I'm just imagining how I would have felt
Mhm.
to see myself represented in, like, my knowledge, which I kind of thought of as home knowledge, and then being represented by this person who is zooming in from, big city with these published books, being able to sing a song that I recognized from my home knowledge. Like, it's just such an amazing experience. So if people want to kind of tap into that power, we have the books listed in the notes, as well as there's a teacher's guide. We'll put Potlatch's Pedagogy for people who haven't read it. And so I just really appreciate, Sarah. I know that you're like, it doesn't have to be all about me. But I really think that these insights have been so helpful and really fun to chat about. So thank you folks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Have a good one. See you.